Alex here with a legal nut and bolts video on injunctions. This topic is really deep and complex. Um, Injunctions are something that humongous companies need just as much as a little person needs, depending on the case. I'm only going to go over some really bare bones details here, and if anyone wants to look into injunctions any further, feel free. First off, what is an injunction? An injunction is an order by a court that prevents somebody from doing a certain thing or act or performing some sort of duty. Basically, it's a way of asking the judge to not allow another person to do a certain thing. I've seen one process in Nevada, at least it's in the civil rules of civil procedure, where you basically start out by filing a motion for temporary restraining order, not to be confused with a restraining order like most people think. Like they're called orders of protection. It's for like against domestic violence and to keep people away from you. I'm not talking about that. That is a type of injunction actually, but that's not what this video is on. Anyway, in just general cases between companies, sometimes they need to stop something from happening, or I'm not going to go into it. There's so many examples of when injunctions are needed. Typically the process starts by filing a motion for temporary restraining order, which the judge will review and determine whether or not to order the person that you're targeting with the temporary restraining order to basically be enjoined from, or be prohibited from, or banned from, or in other words, refrain from doing a certain thing, whatever it is that you're asking the judge to not allow that other person, company, corporation, whatever, to do. The temporary restraining order, from what I've read, isn't too difficult to get. You do have to allege something known as irreparable harm that you cannot recover just from money damages alone. The definition of irreparable harm is quite, I don't want to say complex. I'm just going to let people do their own research on what that is. Don't apply your own dictionary version of irreparable harm. The court system has a very specific, typically each state will have a bunch of cases on what it is and when it applies and when it doesn't. But that typically is what you have to show, or at least allege, before you can get a temporary restraining order. Once you get a temporary restraining order, which is a type of injunction, it's temporary, the court will set some kind of hearing within like 2 weeks, I believe. Again, don't quote me on this. First off, I haven't looked at this in detail. I've never myself wanted or gotten a temporary restraining order. I think I've asked for one before in my child custody case. In fact, I'll go into that example at the end of this video. So anyway, the court will set a hearing. I think it's in 2 weeks, but I'm not sure now. It might be 2 months, or the number 2's jumping out at me. And then at that point, the court will set a hearing for something known as a preliminary injunction. That's where if you have to show up, and basically the court will hear arguments from both sides, consider testimony and evidence, and decide whether or not to issue the preliminary injunction. If the preliminary injunction issues, my understanding is that that injunction stays open until some set time or until the case is closed. It's possible maybe that there's types of injunctions that just stay open indefinitely. I have no idea. It would be cool to hear from somebody in the comments below if they know anything about that. I was going to go ahead and go into my example as to when I used a temporary restraining order, or at least when I asked for one. I believe for anyone who hasn't seen my video, Modifying Physical Custody, check it out, because I'm going to kind of talk about the dental neglect that my son went through. Anyway, there was all kinds of conflict in my case. There was a huge allegation of dental neglect from me, accusing my ex. My son needed 5 crowns and 2 extractions. Basically, it went to a hearing, and the judge modified physical custody based in large part on my ex's dental neglect. The judge did make a specific finding that she did commit dental neglect on our child. That was not just me saying that. We went to a full-blown evidentiary hearing, and I proved it. Dentist went and everything. Anyway, before things got that bad, there was a point where my ex was canceling dental appointments, and so I asked the district court to issue something known as a temporary restraining order to prevent her from canceling appointments. It was denied, and as you know, our child suffered, and later on, a different judge went ahead and modified custody wholesale from the abuse and neglect. But anyway, I did see another case. It was a friend I was helping where she had her ex, apparently her ex took the kids to another city and said he was going to homeschool them. Sent her an email, withdrew them from school and everything. I said, you know, you should try this. I tried it in my case and it didn't work. She did have my old judge, and he responded differently this time. I'm not sure if he just realized maybe he shouldn't just be denying those routinely. Maybe he should be looking into them, or if for some reason he thought the fact that kids were pulled out of school was somehow more um, indicative of irreparable harm than having 5 crowns and 2 extractions at age 7. I mean, there's a little bit of sarcasm there. I'm not sure what these judges are thinking sometimes. They'll just grant it for one person and deny it for somebody else. And this is what makes people think that there's gender bias and such. Anyway, that's my example of trying to get a temporary restraining order and it not working. But as everyone knows, my case turned out well in the end, so it's not really a big deal. Now, looking back in hindsight, it is a topic that I did want to cover in case anyone wanted to look into it in more detail. So I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but typically when injunctions are appropriate, are all over the place in the statutes, in the case law, in the court rules, because there's all kinds of different times when they're needed. And I even know there's a special rule in the Supreme Court of Nevada, in the Nevada Rules of Appellate Procedure, where if an injunction is granted or denied, you're actually allowed to appeal that, which is odd because it's considered an interlocutory order. An order granting or denying an injunction, it does not end the case. The case is still going, so it's not a dispositive order. And the general rule there is that you cannot appeal it, but there's an exception in the Nevada Rules of Appellate Procedure. And I think I do talk about that a teeny tiny bit in my video, Filing an Appeal. It's a good video to watch, check out if you're curious as to how appeals work generally. But I think with that, I've kind of gone into everything that I'm going to go into on this topic, and I guess I'll see you guys next time.